Hello, welcome to Talk Wildlife, and today I'm going to be talking about the press release that I received recently from the BTO, in which they state that they've noticed a decline in numbers of two particular finches, the Siskin and the Bullfinch, in gardens and through the garden BirdWatch research that is a citizen science project run by the BTO. So I have with me Rob Jaques, who is from Garden Watch for BTO. Hi, Rob, how are you?
Hi, I'm great, thanks. You?
I'm very well, thanks. So thanks for joining me. And first of all, I want to just sort of talk about these changes that you've seen. So Siskin and Bullfinch, it quotes in the press release that you've seen changes in numbers in 2020, sort of the beginning of the year. So I think before we actually go into the numbers, can you just describe for us, because there's two sort of, if you like, distinct seasons for these birds. So can you just talk us through when you'd expect to see them in your gardens?
So Siskin, which is the most interesting one we've seen, normally we start to see their highest numbers in February, March time, early spring. This is normally because their wild food, which is seeds such as pine cones and alders, may be less available, less numerous, so they're turning to garden feeders, also because the weather might be turning against them. This is not when we see this peak, but what we've seen this year is really low numbers throughout February and March, when we was expecting to see them in gardens, but they've shot up in autumn, which isn't normally a great time for seeing siskins in gardens. So it's made a kind of unusual pattern, kind of a seesaw effect of what we'd normally expect to see. This does happen. It's happened a few years in the past, but it's not a common occurrence, and it has in the past led to really good siskin numbers in the following February and March, which we're now predicting might happen.
Mm-hmm. And what about Bullfinch?
Bullfinch have less consistent trends. We do see them more in gardens in the winter months. Yet again, normally as their food starts to decline in the wild, so they're really dependent on fruiting trees, taking the seeds from those. So in early autumn, we won't see them very often in gardens because countryside is laden with berries. They'll be using those, but as the colder months set in, we get into January, February, March, we'll say bullfinch numbers go up, but they've been very low this year.
Right. Okay. So let's stick with the siskin just for a minute. So the siskin, I mean, it could end up being sort of very good news because you're seeing more of them now in autumn, which means there might be more in spring, and that trend might continue. What do you think, if anything, and at this stage it might be too early for you to say, but what do you think might have driven that change in the numbers earlier this year?
When we've looked at the regions which have seen the biggest increase in numbers of siskins in gardens during the autumn, it has been north-west England and parts of Scotland. The biggest populations for siskin in the UK are West Scotland, which had lots of very heavy rainfall September through October. What we think has happened is a lot of those siskins in those areas have been pushed out of there because of the heavy rainfall. When there's heavy rainfall, lots of trees close their seeds, making them inaccessible to siskins. This was forced them into different areas. So if you were living in Cumbria, there's a really good chance at the moment you'll be seeing lots of siskins on feeders, more so than you usually would at this time of year. And it could also just been a good breeding year as well. We may have seen, we don't know yet much about the breeding success. So nest record scheme, which BTO manages, as we get figures from that, we may get a better understanding of how well siskins have fared this year. So it could be a couple of different reasons why.
Right. Okay. And Goldfinch, their numbers have been sort of on the edge for many, many years. Why have you noticed the figures so much now? Is it quite a significant change that you've noticed? You know, why all of a sudden, you know, have you gone, right, okay, yeah, we need to do a bit of research on the Bullfinch? Because, as I say, you know, it is something that has pretty much seemed to be a trend, certainly since I was a youngster, which is many years ago. Yeah,
Bullfinches had an interesting history. They were heavily persecuted for a long time. They were pests in orchards because they have a fondness for flower buds, and when they get to certain numbers, they can prevent lots of fruits coming from. But orchards are less commercially viable these days. It's less of an emphasis on it, so there's less of a pressure on bullfinches. So their numbers started to climb as it became less popular pests on fruits. They just grew after that, but then there's been a slow decrease ever since. The reasons why are difficult to understand at the moment. It could be a lot of different reasons, probably habitat change, farmland management, lots of the reasons why we've seen declines in other species that share similar habitats. But there has been a noticeable decrease in the last year. It does maybe imply there was poor overwinter survivability. Maybe not many made it through this year. It wasn't cold, but it was very wet for long parts of it. We don't quite understand what's happening with bullfinch yet. So what we're saying is we've seen this decline at the moment. We don't really know why. So what we're asking is for people to keep an eye out, let us know their records of bullfinches when they see them, to help us get a better understanding of what's happening in gardens.
Yeah, so let's talk about the project, and then once we've done that, we'll talk about how people can go about trying to attract these to the garden if they're not already attracted. So let's talk about the project. What is it you guys are trying to achieve? What do you want to work out from the citizen science that you're going to get?
So Garden Birdwatch has been running for 25 years now with the aim of understanding trends in garden birds. So what we ask people to do is submit the records of their common species so we can see how they fare from year to year. And by doing it for 25 years now, and we've had people recording in their same gardens for 25 years, we're able to see how certain species have changed a lot. And because we ask people to do it all year round, we're also able to see how seasonality changes as well. So like the siskins, we're able to see, okay, if we only took numbers at one time of year, we may only see part of the picture. We may go, oh, siskins have had a bad year. But then if we see them pop up later in the year, we can start to understand these, what problems or what successes they might be having a lot better.
Right. Okay. So, and in order for them to do that, they go on to, if they're not already part of Garden Birdwatch, they go on and they register for Garden Birdwatch, and I believe Garden Birdwatch is free. Is that right? Yeah.
So we used to charge people to take part, but when lockdown began, we understood that watching garden birds is really important for a lot of people, and having an outlet for watching that, somewhere where they can share their sightings. We decided to make it free. So at the moment, and for the foreseeable future, people will be able to join Garden Birdwatch for free. If you're an avid garden birdwatcher, it's a great way to keep a track of what you're seeing in your garden. Due to how our website works, you're able to see your own records and how they change throughout the year. You know, what years maybe you're seeing more species, or your higher counts of particular species. So it's a great way to put all the information in one place and not only help us out, but have this really nice clear picture of what goes on in gardens. And not just looking at birds as well. We've been looking at mammals, butterflies, dragonflies and damselflies, bumblebees for a few years now. Well, I think since 2003. So we're starting to see some interesting trends there as well.
Right. And again, before we move on, because that just prompted a question in my mind, just how important is it that people send you their records and enable you to do this research? How important are gardens to birds?
We think gardens are becoming very important to birds. Particular species certainly seem to be heavily reliant on them, and particularly in certain weathers. When we get heavy frost, for example, we see garden bird feeders become very, very popular. We see numbers spike when we've had beasts from the east, as they always seem to be called. So 2018, in that spring, when we got those very heavy snowfalls coming in, we saw redwing, fieldfare, blackbird, and most other species coming to gardens more often. And it shows how important these resources are for birds, and increasingly as breeding places. So we know from nest boxes, there might not be as many wild places to nest for birds as there used to be. So for species like blue tit and great tit, where quite a lot of people have gardens with nest boxes suitable for those, these are really important spaces. And understanding how these spaces fit into the ecology of these animals is really important to work out the effect we're having on them.
Right. Okay. So this particular project, we're dealing with Siskin and Bullfinch. How do people go? Because plenty of people do feed their birds, but they might find that they are getting Siskin, but they're not getting Bullfinch, or they might not be getting either.
Yeah.
What's the best way of attracting them? What types of foods should you be putting out?
Yeah, Siskins, particularly like Niger seed, which is commonly available now. It's a very small, fine black seed. You have to use slightly different feeders to keep it in, but it's very popular. Siskins and Goldfinches. Bullfinches like sunflower hearts, but they will take more of a broader range of things than the Siskins do. So the important thing, if you want to attract lots of different birds, is to have a variety of seeds, but maybe in separate feeders. That seems to work a lot better than having one big seed mix, which doesn't have very much for any one particular species. Having several feeders with different food seems to maybe be a little bit more.
That's a very good tip, actually, having individual seeds rather than a mix. So that's great. So all of a sudden now we're getting our bullfinches and siskins coming into the garden. People can now, and I will put the link underneath for people to go and register for Garden BirdWatch, so they can send you your records. So what from this project are you sort of hoping to see? What, when you sat down and said, right, okay, so we need to do a project on this. What are you looking for? And I don't mean from a trend of the birds point of view. What are you trying to achieve by doing the project?
I think Garden BirdWatch.
Yeah, no, I say in the Siskins and Bullfinch.
Oh, so what we're hoping for, the Siskins and Bullfinch fit into the wider project of Garden BirdWatch. We are looking at them with a unique survey at the moment. We may do in future years. We do occasionally pull out different surveys to look at maybe a question that the Garden BirdWatch survey can't quite answer. So recently had a tawny owl survey to help us better understand how and when these birds are calling, so that we can better understand changes in tawny owl population, because using traditional methods, tawny owls are very hard to survey for. So by understanding more about their patterns, that helps us to better survey them in the future, so we can better understand their trends. So what we're asking mainly is just for people to let us know all their garden birds, and particularly also let us know, even if you feel like your garden's not a particularly good garden, that's very important for us, because if everyone that takes part has a fantastic, huge wild garden bordering onto like ancient woodland, then we're not going to see a true reflection of what's going on in people's gardens. What we'd really want is small urban and suburban gardens with not much green space around. They're equally important, and you may only be seeing a few birds at a time when you're putting in your records, but that's really important, as important as the gardens that are seeing hundreds of birds with lots of different species.
Yeah, right. Okay, so what I want to do is, because I've got an expert in front of me, we've talked about Siskin and Bullfinch, and I have sort of slightly pre-warned you about this, but only this morning, so apologies for that. But I want to just talk about sort of a few other finches, because we've heard, green finches are not faring well. I'd like to just touch on that. I'm really worried about the fact that chaffinch numbers now seem to be going in the wrong direction. So can we first of all just talk about greenfinches and chaffinches, particularly in gardens, not in the greater countryside, because obviously, you work for Garden BirdWatch. So what are we seeing trend-wise for greenfinch and chaffinch in gardens at the moment?
So greenfinch used to be one of the most common garden birds, regular at feeders that seem to really took to garden feeders much quicker than a lot of other finches did. But since the mid-2000s, their numbers plummeted. The cause for this seems likely to be trichomoniasis, which is a disease which is spread from bird to bird and causes a clogging in their throat, so they're eventually not able to feed, and then they die from malnourishment and inability to breathe. What we're seeing now is a very similar pattern happening with chaffinches, but a lot later. So it seems as the disease has become a little bit more comfortable with chaffinches now, and it's now affecting those. So we're seeing a similar decline. Fortunately, in a few areas and a few places, we're seeing at least a plateauing of the numbers for greenfinch. They're not getting much more worse, and in a few areas seem to be going up a little bit. Right. However, this could, if we see other trichomoniasis outbreaks, maybe this could be affected. So we don't want to say it's all okay at the moment, and their numbers are still much lower than they used to be. Chaffinch, we do see the same decline, and it's at the moment, unless the way that we feed birds changes, we're going to see a very similar thing. So this is why we're really encouraging people to practice feeding their bird feeders regularly, once a week at least, only putting out enough food for a day, not letting it sit around and get wet and stale, and just keeping these areas maintained, because lots of birds will come to them, and it's a great way for birds to spread diseases in quite an unnatural way.
Right. Okay. So cleaning feed is clearly imperative in sort of, you know, trying to manage this disease. If that happened, so, you know, everybody cleaned their feeders and everything was fine, would that, and this is probably a hard question for you, it just came to me while you were talking, but if everybody did clean their feeders and followed the guidance that you've just given, would that be a solution, as in a total solution, or is there also something else that is causing that disease?
The disease itself is probably most likely being spread through feeders, and that's not that there is other parts of the decline in greenfinches and chaffinches which are likely due to habitat changes. This is wider countryside stuff, that where we put out a chaffinch appeal earlier this year, hoping to better understand some of the things that are affecting chaffinches, because while disease is a component of that, their numbers are also going down in areas where feeding isn't commonly taking place. So it does imply there's maybe some other things going on. So even if everyone were to be perfect, and which everyone should be perfect with their feeder hygiene, we'd probably still see some declines in chaffinches at least, and possibly in greenfinch, because the disease probably muddies the waters of helping us understand other things going on as well, because it's probably not entirely the disease. There's probably other factors going on with these birds, as we've seen with lots of birds.
Yeah, right. Okay. And so staying with finches, final finch I'd like to talk about is Goldfinch, because where it seems that greenfinches and chaffinches are having a bit of bad luck, and that Siskin and Bullfinch numbers seem to be a little bit sort of out of kilter at the moment, not particularly in a negative way.
No.
Goldfinch seems to be doing really, really well. I mean, certainly they equal the house sparrow in my garden as being the most common bird. What's happening with Goldfinch? How come all of a sudden can't call it a boom in Goldfinches, but how come their numbers are sort of going up? How come they're doing so well?
Essentially Niger seed. So the seed I mentioned before, which is good for siskins, this will be attracting goldfinches in as well. They were previously a bird associated with arable fields, with farming, not really a garden bird, maybe occasionally during cold spells, but not a common garden bird. But as new seeds have come onto the market and been commonly available for people have been putting different kinds of food out, and this has attracted new species. Goldfinch is one of the ones that's really done very well out of Niger seed. It matches their wild seeds. I like also sunflower hearts as well. They're also a big fan of those. It seems to be there's some gardens have lots of success with sunflower seeds, and some have Niger seed, and maybe not so much with the other one. People have to experiment a little bit, and we don't quite know why that is. But they have shot up, and it does seem to be entirely because of feeder usage. And then as there's food available, they're able to breed more close to gardens, if not in gardens. And yeah, we've seen their numbers shoot up. They have maybe we kind of reached a maximum limit at the moment. The numbers aren't quite going up in the same amount as we've seen, but they don't seem to be showing any traits for catching trichomoniasis. So they seem quite comfortable at garden feeders at the moment, and people enjoy them a lot. They're a very colourful bird. They're very charming to watch, and yeah, so hopefully they'll be in our gardens for a long time to come. Yeah,
in my garden it's definitely sunflower hearts that win the day. So is there a danger, and this might be an unfair question because clearly it requires research, but is there a danger that this disease can sort of jump species and end up having an impact on the goldfinch?
It's not impossible. The disease shows up in lots of different species of animal. It's been recorded in collared doves, which are also doing quite poor at the moment. It can be sometimes seen in wood pigeons, and sometimes even in sparrowhawks. Which has probably got it from predating birds that have the disease. At the moment, we're not seeing any signs of it. It's I believe there are some records of goldfinch having trichomoniasis, but it doesn't seem to be spreading throughout the population. However, these diseases can change. They can become more suitable for different hosts. So it could be something we see in the future. So this is why we ask people to record their sightings of ill birds to Garden Wildlife Health, which is one of our which is a project we run with partner organisations at the Zoological Society of London, RSPB and Frog Life. We ask people to submit any records they have of sick wildlife, birds, frogs, snakes and mammals, particularly hedgehogs. And this lets us to know where maybe there's flare-ups of disease, or maybe what we need to be keeping an eye out for, because new diseases do show up. Yeah. And it's a great way for us to keep an eye on what's going on in the countryside and what might come in the future and how we can best mitigate it.
Right. Okay. So if we would take a couple of, if we would take two things away from this interview, number one is record your birds in your garden.
Yep.
And number two is keep your feeders clean.
That's it.
So I'm already in my mind, I'm thinking, well, there's an opportunity, because some of these bird feeding companies could think, oh, right, okay, if the BTO is suggesting changes in how we feed garden birds, because I'll be honest, I put food out and, it might be out there a few days. I'd recently tweeted about just washing my feeders, but if there were smaller feeders available that were dead easy to clean, you could do it on a daily basis, you put it out.
Yeah,
I'm not saying that I'm patenting this, but me and you after the event. I just think there might be an opening there for smaller feeders.
There is
smaller, easy to clean daily feeders.
Yeah, well, I mean, so what some people do is they even just bring them in at a night. And when people buy feeders, when you look at it, the shop think, can you take that apart? Is there parts of the feeder where food could maybe get stuck in there and it's going to go mouldy and maybe it's not going to be easy to take out? Find a feeder that's easy to clean. And it is tempting to go for really long ones, because you go, oh, that's great, I can top it up once a month and that's fine. But really, we should only be putting out seed that would feed the birds for about a day. Stops them hanging around quite as much, so they're spreading disease less, and stops old food accumulating, getting wet, and that has other implications as well. Certain funguses will linger on, mouldy and old food. So it's lots of health benefits for the birds for doing that. And also moving feeders around in the garden so that certain areas don't become laden with diseases. Just keep making things as diverse as possible for the birds. And they're very quick to learn where the new food source is. It doesn't take them very long. Yeah,
and I know on the BTO website there are sort of a few good leaflets on A, how to feed birds, and B, about the disease. So I'll put links to that as well so people can go and have a look. But I think that's a great message to leave with, just make sure your feeders are clean and record birds. Rob, thank you very much for sort of giving us an insight both into garden bird feeding, but also into what you're trying to achieve through the Siskin and Bullfinch piece. Maybe we can do a follow-up in middle of next year to find out how the numbers have gone.
That'd be great, yeah. And by that point, we'll be seeing some other trends with other species as well. There's always lots going on in the gardens, and not just in the birds, also in other garden wildlife as well.
Sure. All right, Rob. Well, thank you very much, and we'll leave it there. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Take care.
You too.